Hear that sound? Imagine that's the sound of a bot, a web crawler. Just a few really quite simple lines of code scraping the internet. It's looking for something. It's looking, among other things, for your mistakes.
You're listening to the Ticker Podcast from IR Magazine, a roundup of this week's leading stories and industry comment from the world of investor relations.
Hi, everyone. It's happened to the best of them, or at least the biggest. Google, Microsoft, Twitter, JP Morgan, Dow, and Daimler. It seems to happen a lot. But in fact, no one really knows how often it happens, or even to who. But it happens. It's embarrassing, basically illegal, and the consequences can be devastating.
It's pretty much what every IRO is scared of.
On today's program, Premature Disclosure. We'll look at tips and tricks any IRO can use to prevent premature, selective, or erroneous disclosure. And has board diversity hit an impasse? We'll hear about the latest trends affecting change in ethnic and racial diversity in Fortune 500 boardrooms.
Boards are being more proactive in thinking about adding diversity to the board.
But first, here's this week's IR Ticker News. Hong Kong-based firms are taking big strides towards boosting their corporate governance performance. A PwC survey of published governance reports finds significant enhancements to their level of disclosure on internal control and risk management systems. This follows the introduction of an amended governance code at the start of 2016. Still, the PwC report points out certain areas with plenty of room for improvement. For example, while almost all firms claim to have an internal audit function, only 36% disclose sufficient resources, qualifications, and experienced internal audit staff. Top executives at Asian firms are ramping up their commitment to investor relations. According to IR Magazine's latest Global Practice Report, Asia-based senior managers committed an average 66 days to investor relations-related tasks last year. That's a year-on-year increase of 8 days. The figure is substantially higher than for counterparts based in Europe, where the average for the year is 36 days, and the US, where it's 42. Activists have set their sights on Israeli companies. 12 companies were targeted over the last 18 months, according to new data from research firm Activist Insight. That's as many as in all of the previous 3 years. Israel also appears to be popular with short sellers. There have been 21 campaigns against Israel-headquartered companies since 2013. The National Investor Relations Institute has joined the list of those asking for greater regulation of proxy advisors' practices. In a letter to the SEC, NERI Chief Executive Gary LeBranch called on the regulator to investigate whether ISS and Glass Lewis are acting in compliance with the Investment Advisors Act. The current system allows for automated vote casting on behalf of investor clients, a model LeBranch believes contravenes the rule. Finally, U.S. President Donald Trump is being discussed less in conversations between issuers and investors than he was 6 months ago. According to research by FactSet, there's been a 76% decline in the number of companies making reference to the now president during quarterly earnings calls. The research firm suggests that the decline in Trump citations may be a sign that corporations are growing less confident that Trumpist policies will be enacted in the near future. Last year, America's Fortune 500 firms added over 400 non-executive directors to their boards. That's more turnover than ever before. But who are these people anyway? To find out, IR Magazine's Ben Ashwell sat down with Heidrick Struggles Vice Chairman Jeffrey Sanders. And coming up next, the last of a three-part series, Ben and Jeff focus on the latest trends in boardroom racial and ethnic diversity.
We're talking today about Heidrick Struggles' latest board monitor. This is an annual report into Fortune 500 board appointments. So, Jeff, according to the board monitor, the percentage share of ethnically and racially diverse board members appointed to the Fortune 500 has increased from 14% in 2009 to 22% in 2016. Why do you think we're seeing this increase?
I think it's because boards are being more proactive in thinking about adding diversity to the boards. Mm-hmm. Diversity from an ethnicity standpoint, diversity from a gender standpoint, and diversity of thought. It's not enough progress. There needs to be more made. Mm-hmm. But I think the reason you see the increase is awareness followed by proactively trying to change.
Well, and to your point, to play devil's advocate, while the progress has improved, there is still roughly only one ethnically or racially diverse board member appointed for every 3 white board members. And of course, that doesn't reflect the diversity that we see in society today, or even on the street down in New York. So why do you think that is historically? Why do you think that is, and what are boards doing to redress it?
Well, I think historically, the issue has been that if you look at 2/3 of the appointees were either current or former CEOs and either current or former CFOs. Mm-hmm. And that population of people does not have nearly enough diversity in it. Mm-hmm. So within the CFO population, 5% of that group is ethnically diverse, and within the CEO population, 6.7% is ethnically diverse. And if you're focusing your efforts on that population, there's a limit to how many ethnically diverse people can serve on boards. And so I think boards have to become more creative in how they think about sourcing talent. Mm-hmm. Think in a broader way as you look into the C-suite, think a broader way as your business enters the market, and ways to become more inclusive and to bring people along.
And so how does that affect the work that you do with that sort of limited talent pool, working with boards to think about broadening horizons, broadening perspectives? How does it affect your work?
Well, it affects our work in the fact that our job is to help them understand how they can approach their thinking in a different way in order to become more diverse. Mm-hmm. And so we have those conversations on an ongoing basis as we're talking with boards over the long term about their own succession strategies and how they can become more proactive and to give them ideas that we're seeing, peer companies do in order to make themselves more diverse.
Sure, and I remember sort of covering gender diversity as a topic back in London around sort of 2009, 2010, when momentum really picked up. And I remember talking to some of your peers in London at the time, and they were saying, it's amazing how in conversations, subtle things like changing from board experience required to board exposure required or something, right. Subtle things like that just open up a significantly broader talent pool. And presumably that's the kind of work you're doing now with your clients and sort of,
Absolutely. Everyone's a first-time independent director at some point, sure. Right? So it's steering how you choose to open the door for people to enter and to have that first-time experience.
Excellent. Well, thank you for participating in these videos, Jeff. It's been a pleasure. And I would recommend that everyone takes a look at the Heidrick Struggles board monitor. So thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Ibrey Woodall is one of America's top webmasters. She's played a major role in the launch of online newsrooms and IR websites for a slew of big-time corporations, both stateside and around the world. Now, as Business Wire's Senior Vice President for Web Communication Services, her top priorities are making sure her clients' websites are both secure and updated with the latest technology. When it comes to security, Woodall believes that too many IR sites today are just begging to become victims of Murphy's Law. I reached her at Business Wire's Florida office to find out why and what IROs can do about it. For Woodall, the elements of security go beyond the expected network and server infrastructure support. We talked about issues around internal human workflows, technical compatibility of the systems used to announce your company's financial information, and abiding by fairly basic security conventions and protocols. Our conversation begins on the all-too-common scourge of premature disclosure.
It's pretty much what every IRO is scared of, if you think about it. I mean, because, say you're having a good day and something happens, and all of a sudden your earnings are on your IRA website before they should be, so therefore it's not being disseminated simultaneously to everyone. Therefore, all of a sudden, somebody else has it before somebody else does, and you've just got a really bad day ahead of you. There are best practices and guidelines to go by to keep this from happening so that you don't have to spend the rest of your time dealing with it, because it certainly leads to a bad day. I mean, when there are tried and true methods established, why not utilize them?
There are tried and true methods, and people don't seem to be picking up on them because these things seem to be happening a lot still now. Sorry. They
do still happen because someone will try something new or they'll think that they can handle it. Sometimes it's just new people, that aren't used to it, don't really know what they should be doing. Unfortunately, that's still happening out there in the IR world. Just like any time you're responsible for something this important, you really should be aware of those tried and true methods, and at least, until you have it down pat, make sure that you follow them. It's technology. Technology does change every day, but sometimes, you shouldn't just do something just for the sake of doing it, just because you can do it from a technology perspective. You should just make sure that, you are following what you know to work. There are a lot of elements that go around creating and maintaining the IR site. And every IRO should be cognizant of that, and their team should be cognizant of that, going beyond just the normal technical server hardware infrastructure. That's usually handled by the tech team, but there are things that the IR team should really follow, be aware of at least, to make sure that, their days are going to be decent.
Yeah, that's right. It gets down to the old checklist. It's not just technical. It's this mix of sort of the fat thumb kind of thing, or the fat finger, or just, as you say, somebody who's new on the job, or just something like that, and technology. So the opportunities for this kind of thing are growing, really.
And they're not difficult.
I know, right?
That's the key. They really aren't difficult. I mean, you have to really establish, these habits, if you will. But, I mean, it really, sometimes just to try to, quote, try to save time, sometimes people will post their earnings on the website, under, quote, unquote, a hidden URL, because at that time it's already there and they can just take it live. It's a lot easier for them during the stress of the day. But when you do that, you run the risk of it being found, and it has been found. So, again, it is no longer simultaneous. It's prematurely disclosed.
And in that particular case, it's not even you're running the risk. It seems like with these sort of web crawlers and stuff, it's guaranteed. You leave it on for half a second. Oops, it's already too late. Yeah.
Yeah, oops is indeed a good word. And then again, getting also back to the team. I mean, having new people or having unauthorized people have access to your IR site. You certainly don't want to have, a brand new summer intern be able to post, materials type of content, because they may not know what they're, realize what they're doing. Yes. And a lot of people think, okay, I'm just going to let everybody on my team have access to be able to go into the site and post and publish content. You should be very careful about that. Sometimes people even go to the point of where they have an internal workflow where you've got someone who's responsible for uploading content, and then you have someone responsible, a higher level person responsible for actually vetting that content before it's published. So again, not difficult to do, strictly related to internal workflow and not server related. And these are things that are, as you know, in the world of cybersecurity are really, really becoming very, very important. I mean, even down to the basics of password generation. You need to have your passwords 8 characters in length, minimum. You need to make sure that you change them on somewhat frequently. You need to make sure they're not easy to guess. They have to be strong. In today's world, it's use of, lowercase and uppercase numbers and special characters. These are all things that, again, are not difficult to do, but they may be sometimes not as sexy as, being able to design a website or anything like that, but these are things that you really need to adhere to. And the team needs to not share these passwords. The manager needs to make sure that the team is indeed changing these passwords on a frequent basis. These are, again, in my personal opinion, these are things that are fairly simple.
It's not rocket science. It's not like
rocket science.
You have to. It really is kind of just more or less a checklist or a protocol. Really,
it is. It is. As far as the internal workflow goes, but then it can get a little bit more technical. I mean, when you start going to the next level of, you start talking about technical compatibility. This is where you're actually really going to gain the efficiencies, and it's just so. When you're using, especially if you're using a vendor for your IR site hosting, as we all know, whenever you're utilizing vendors, corporations are utilizing vendors, you're going to really gain a lot of efficiencies if you use a single vendor for multiple services. It's just you gain in time and you gain in budget. Again, still being the tried and true best practice is to send out a press release announcing your earnings. That's still, nothing new, nothing too soon, but sending it out over Newswire distribution and then having that posted automatically and directly to your IR site, which is also hosted by your Newswire vendor. That's where you're going to get efficiencies, and that's also where you're going to reduce risk because you're dealing with one vendor and you're dealing with that particular vendor's systems, if you will, technical systems. So, you don't have as the opportunity of that particular release being delayed in posting to your IR site or heaven forbid, even lost. If some other vendors have to actually access it through an additional workflow step or going to an additional aggregator to get that particular release. So it's just kind of, like you say, not only is it a checklist, but it's steps. Step 1, step 2, step 3. If you have to add in step 2A, then you're going to add in additional risk. Does that make sense?
I understand why Business Wire would want to suggest that. But the thing is, like what we were just talking about before, is like self-publishing is no panacea. Even if you do it all in-house, you're still going to have that checklist, and you do want to keep all those steps kind of to one sort of unit kind of thing. But if you are going to have somebody, a third party, you want to have just one kind of direct arrow to that third party and not have other steps in that can be tripped up one way or another.
And also, I mean, and even if you are like you said, just using your own technical team, then you have to get to the next level that you really, as an IRO, you really should be aware of and not just take for granted that, the team is doing what they should be doing as far as security awareness goes, whether it's your internal tech team or your vendor. I mean, they should be following defined security practices, such as, making sure that they possibly have been monitored by a third party, an independent auditor, to make sure that they are doing certain things that they should be doing. This is going to probably be more prominent for vendors than it will be for internal ones. But you want your internal team to also be following these best practices, if you will. I mean, these things are relating to security, availability of your content, privacy, things like that are a big deal in today's world. And there are certifications out there, and every technical team knows about them, that actually prove that they are following these best practices or these defined security principles that are out there today. Whether you're having to, just have basic checks and balances of limiting physical access to only select personnel, blocking specific IP addresses, actually forcing those password updates if the IR team is not necessarily doing it on their own. They need to be forced to do it because, all of a sudden, if you haven't accessed, or actually if you are not working on your site for a while, you really want that to, and you walk away from your desk, you really want to make sure that thing is going to automatically log you out after X amount of time, because the last thing you want is somebody else coming in there, and making changes to it because they have access. These are basic security steps that humans have to handle.
There are basic security
steps. Technology has to back up.
There just seems to be so many of them, so many vulnerabilities. At any step of the way, that's why you want to limit those steps. At any step of the way, there could be a myriad bunch of snafus. Something could be left on a table. You could walk away from your desk. I think the sort of hidden URL phenomena, I can't believe that companies would still do that, but maybe there are some smaller ones that still do.
Large ones too.
And oh yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. But it went for a while where just because they felt they could, they would. And I think once you get burned, you learn not to do it again. And if you're not having what I call technical compatibility, where, when you do have the newswire distribution out there, you should have the technical part of this, the machinery, to be able to receive that press release that's been distributed and pull it down automatically and directly. A lot of them will always automatically post. There's a way to do that, to grab a feed and do that. But you need to make sure that it's pulling directly from systems that are all within the same environment versus out there having it sent out into the universe, and then, then it has to go to step 2 here, step 3 there, step 4 there, before it actually gets to the IR site. And again, that's a machinery. That's all about machinery and making sure that it's integrated very cleanly.
There are a lot of ways to mess things up, but ultimately it seems like this is what's going to hit you in the end. It's going to be one of these sort of web crawlers or Bloomberg or somebody, or just somebody guessing.
It could be that. Yeah, it could be that, but it could also be as simple as a human being guessing what URL you have it at.
Right.
Because you have a naming convention that, okay, fine, earnings release XXXX, so it could be as simple as a very sharp journalist just guessing at what it is. I mean, the bots are out there. There's no doubt about that. They're scraping and scraping and scraping and taxing your servers and, looking for these things.
What happens when this happens? Has anyone ever been, kind of prosecuted under FD? Or, I guess there's heads roll and stuff, but is beyond just that, is there legal consequences? Just heads, yeah.
Heads do roll. What happens, it usually affects the stock price. Sometimes in a negative way. Yes, you're supposed to be adhering to the fact that you should be giving this information to all parties at all times simultaneously. So there could be legal ramifications there. But what you are going to also happen to you is the fact that you're going to garner a lot of unwanted media attention, and which is going to provide negative conversation around the company out there in the universe, which, of course, as we know, can sometimes affect stock price. And you're going to have to deal with that as an IRO and come back from it.
It's going to be a headache. It's going to take a lot of time just to deal with it. But also, it makes you look stupid. It's embarrassing. It makes people wonder what you're doing.
It's embarrassing.
Yeah.
When there are known, tried and true methods, and it is. That's a good word for it. Embarrassing is a good word for it. But it's also unprofessional. And it's okay to be a risk taker, but only in certain areas.
Yeah, there's that. This is not one of those areas. But I'm just wondering, have you ever heard of anyone actually being prosecuted other than the heads rolling kind of thing?
No, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you that. No, there may be some history out there, but I couldn't tell you that.
So I guess the SEC just says, okay.
I do know of heads rolling. I do know of that. IRO heads.
Anyone in particular?
I'm not going to comment on that.
I can imagine. Yeah, it's hard to bounce back from that. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And so, I mean, and again, this really isn't just, surrounding IR sites. I mean, it is when you're dealing with IR sites. I mean, your website is the last thing you want to become a liability, obviously. I mean, you want it to run very smoothly because, I mean, IROs have way too many jobs. The last thing you want to deal with is a situation with the website. But when it comes to security, that goes beyond just IR sites. That's every site nowadays. Just like every site nowadays needs to be, responsive, adaptive responsive so that mobile devices can access it. Every site should go through a gauntlet of security steps before they are launched, if you will, and maintained on a regular basis.
So your point being that's definitely doesn't have to be a headache. You've got better things to do. This is almost kind of like a pro forma thing. If you want to do it right, there is a way to do it right. You've got better things to do, and the regret risk is huge. Yeah.
Exactly, regret risk. I like that. And then when you talk about technology, I mean, technology changes every day. So there's always going to be something new that comes out that, makes these steps and these guidelines updated and improved. So if you're following them, it's a lot easier to add one more if you're already following them than just to all of a sudden have to hustle and add them all at one time.
And you still get a sense that people aren't, taking sort of fairly basic, even larger companies aren't taking fairly basic precautions. Like they'll have a 6-word password, or they might, as you said, they'll have a outward-facing or a simple to figure out URL, and they'll still do that somehow for some reason. I don't know. And the funny thing is, they may not even know they're being, found out, right?
Correct.
It's not necessary that whoever's finding them out is going to broadcast this. They'll just wait for the next quarter and the next quarter and the next quarter, and they'll just keep doing it over and over again.
But a lot of it has to do with just like I said, the human factor, especially in the internal workflow. I mean, not having not training new people, having a young IR team. Have these procedures, internal workflow procedures. Like you say, from the human factor, but also from the technical factor. Make sure your IT team or your vendor, make sure they're following these things that they need to follow. Whether they're performing vulnerability scans, I always have problems with that word, on your servers and making sure your servers are up to speed and no one can hack them, things like that. It's a blend. It's a blend of human and technical.
Is your IR site a security liability? Check out Business Wire's new white paper on cybersecurity at irmagazine.com. That's all for this week. Be sure to join us again next week for a special edition of the Ticker Podcast. IR Magazine's Garnet Roach explores the relationship between pay, seniority, and sex in the IR profession, and what we can do to ensure a level playing field.
And I think if you don't have a sense of what your market worth is, it makes it very hard to negotiate from that position.
Thanks for listening. In Montreal, I'm Jeff Cassette.
You've been listening to the Ticker Podcast from IR Magazine. For free access to all the latest global investor relations news and analysis, register at irmagazine.com or download the app.